The October 16 board meeting of JEA will now come to order. I'd like to ask everyone to rise for a moment of reflection before the pledge. As you pause for reflection, I'd like to ask that everyone remember those who were impacted by last week's storms in the Panhandle and all the crews that we've sent out there to render assistance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We've had an agenda published and circulated. I have a motion to adopt the agenda. So moved. Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Agenda is adopted. Safety briefing, Mr. Zahn.
Thank you, Chairman. Safety is a core value of JEA. In the event of emergency, may I have somebody that's going to dial 911? John, and somebody for CPR? Melissa? In the event of evacuation, please identify the person to your right as your neighbor. Use the stairs to the left of the elevator. Proceed in an orderly fashion across the open parking lot to the southeast corner of Main and Church. Please, as a reminder, put your cell phones on silent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Call on our Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Jody Brooks, for a Sunshine Law and Public Records statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a duly noticed public meeting that has been advertised properly. Quorum is present in the room, and we're in good order to proceed, and minutes will be taken.
Thank you very much. Now take comments from the public. Recognize Dave Brutally. Mr. Brutally, haven't seen you in a while. Please come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Bruderly. I'm a retired professional engineer with 50-some years experience in the energy environmental business. And I'm still digesting everything I observed during my recent voyage around the world, second time I've done that in 50 years. And the level of changes that are happening in Asia, combined with the recent IPCC report, motivated me to come back here and talk to you once again about the importance of action on reducing the carbon footprint. But I want to focus, and you've heard me talk about electing or hiring a leader who can not only help transition this utility to a 21st century utility, but given the urgency that's come out of the IPCC report last week and the need for action now, and I don't think the world's going to end in 10 years if we don't start moving forward, but we do have time. But we need a leader for this utility who can be an effective communicator with the entire community, all the stakeholders in this community, to help people understand the facts and science about energy and work with our stakeholder partners such as the transportation folks, the economic development people, of the importance of trying to move this, developing a plan that will move this community to a net zero carbon economy. Pick a goal, say 20 years from now, something like that, that's achievable, but try to factor economic carbon metrics into every economic decision that's made by everybody in this community. Because if we don't do that level of education, followed by planning and having a plan with goals, we're not going to achieve all the goals that we want JEA to achieve as a public utility. And I just say again, you guys as the board, you don't have to wait for President Trump to figure out whether or not climate change is a hoax. You don't have to wait for Tallahassee to come around and start doing something with policy. You can do a lot right here locally, thinking globally and acting locally, and so far I'm very encouraged by what you have been doing. But I just want to focus on your decision for your next leader, that you go beyond just the operation requirements of managing for budget and cost, but also find ways to bring those external costs into the planning process, the metrics. And the number one most important metric in my mind is the carbon metric. How do we put a price on carbon so that the market forces that are out there that everybody responds to will help people make better decisions? I'm a capitalist. I'm not a raving socialist like some politicians would have you believe. Democrats are not socialists. I'm a democratic capitalist. But I want government and government entities, especially a monopoly like you guys have, to basically start making decisions that recognize that Adam Smith said that the role of government is to protect the commons, all of us, from exploitation by the mercantilists who have a very short-sighted agenda. And you have a long-term agenda. You're one of the few entities in Florida that has that ability, the power to actually implement what you believe. And I'm here to help you do that in any way possible, and hope that you can make this evaluation criteria number one in your selection process for your next executive director. So that's my speech.
Thank you, Mr. Brutally.
Thank you.
As always, I appreciate your tireless and unflagging support of JEA and interest in community issues, and I can assure you that one of the criteria that we assigned to our outside search committee, search consultant for a new CEO was someone who was forward-looking and forward-thinking. So we expect that all of the candidates for this position will have that attitude. And we're very proud of our 250 megawatts of solar coming online.
All right,
Thank
that's
you.
an excellent first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the comments from our council liaison, Mr. Schellenberg.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a few things, and thank you very much for recognizing me. First of all, I'm so happy to hear about your sister, and it's getting better. I was concerned, as most of us were, and so I am just ecstatic that things are turning around.
Thank you very much.
Second of all, I can't thank the JEA for inviting me to the Innovation Conference. It was extraordinary. It proves to me that there are lots more people in the world than I am, and they're forward-thinking more so than I am. And finally, the only concern I have, and this is really just mine and probably the city as a whole, is that the lawsuits that we have with the various entities right now, we had a 3 notches downgrade. I'm appalled by it, but it will impact, I guess, JEA, but I'm looking out for the city of Jacksonville, and this concerns me going forward, and I hope that these things get resolved sooner rather than later. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Schellenberg. I'll address the Moody's downgrade in my comments later. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented?
So,
Thank you, Ms. Green. Is there a second? Thank you, Reverend Newville. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved. Recognize Ms. Dykes and Mr. Wanamaker. No, just Ms. Dykes. Okay, for our monthly financial and operations dashboard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've let Mr. Wanamaker off the hook for this agenda item this morning because he's got quite a few others that he'll be presenting on. There is a handout that's included at your seat that is the dashboard for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2018.
Did this change in any way from the one that was circulated electronically by Ms. Charleroi yesterday?
It did. We were able to add the speedometers at the bottom of the page, which I'll be able to touch on in my comments.
Thank you. I forgot to bring my reader.
Yeah, I apologize for the small type on here. This is the results for the last fiscal year. So this does include an entire fiscal year of outcomes. And I'll just start my comments by giving an overview of the financial performance and the influencing factors from last year. In the electric system, our sales were up about 2.6% over the prior year. They're up more than our customer growth. Our customer growth is up 1.6%, and that was really driven by a very cold winter. We had a very hot end of summer, but really the sales growth was driven by a cold winter, and you'll see the impact of that in the financial results. A different story in the water and sewer system. Water and sewer sales are actually down 2.8% versus the prior year. Sales per customer are down almost 5%, and that follows precipitation. It rained a lot this year, and so there's less irrigation in particular, which drove water and sewer sales down for the year. I'll just touch on a couple of the metrics in the dashboard. Again, as a reminder, these are all the metrics that we track to measure corporate performance. They are grouped into buckets according to the values that they drive. So we've got buckets for customer value, financial value, community impact value, and environmental value. I'll particularly focus on the top section of this, which were the metrics that were tied to corporate goals for the year. The bottom two sets of metrics comprise metrics that we watch and metrics that will influence over the long term as part of our strategic planning process. I'll start with customer response time. Our customer response time missed our goal for the year, and that was really primarily driven by how cold the winter was. When the weather got very, very cold, we had numerous pipe freezes, which resulted in breaks, particularly on the customer side of water meters, which increased our response time there. We are hopeful we'll be able to drive that down through the next fiscal year. If you flip down to outage duration, we exceeded our goal by 16% in outage duration. That's about halfway down that first group of customer value metrics. That one I highlight for two reasons. One, because that was a struggle for us at the beginning of the year with the weather in particular that we struggled with. And we've been able to drive that down through the year. It's also a focus, a programmatic focus for the electric system, not only this year, but going into next year to be able to continue to drive down that number. So we're very pleased to see that come in 16% below our goal. Water unplanned outages, we did miss our goal by a pretty significant margin. That was driven by 2 very large water main breaks, which affected 12,000 customers. Those 2 events affected so many customers that it caused us to miss our goal for that. And water distribution system pressure, which is the final goal under customer, or the final metric under the customer value section, I did just want to highlight. We exceeded our goal by 28% there, but what I particularly wanted to highlight was we finished the year with 1.8 average minutes below 30 psi. If you rewind back to 2012, which is the first metric that's on the page, we're at almost 35. We began tracking this metric and setting goals around it in 2013, and you can see the effect of us having really gone after this metric with that downward trend there. So we're very pleased with that outcome. The final metric I'll highlight for you is under the environmental value section. Our nitrogen to the river, we did exceed our goal very, very slightly. We're 0%, so we're basically on top of it. And I wanted to highlight it because we're actually very proud of the performance in that goal. We set a goal at the beginning of the year that we frankly didn't think we'd be able to achieve. We had a construction project that was underway at Arlington East that was going to cause our nitrogen to the river to increase this year, and so we did not think we would be anywhere close to being able to achieve that goal for this year. On top of that, we had to respond to Hurricane Irma with repairs at Buckman, which also increased nitrogen for the river. To the river. This team made changes in the chemistry at the wastewater treatment facility. They made changes in our processes, and they were able to drive this number down and almost meet our goal for the year. So even though we missed, it's a really great story that's behind that goal. I will move to the bottom part of the page, which has the speedometers on it. These speedometers comprised our pay for performance program for this year. This program was rolled out at the beginning of the fiscal year after meeting with the compensation committee of the board, and there are 6 goals that were set out in the pay for performance program. Of these 6 goals, these were stretch goals for the organization. We worked hard to achieve them, but unfortunately we only made 2. And we did not make 4. So the goals that we achieved were the non-fuel dollars per megawatt hour in the electric system. We were very close, but worked very hard to make sure we could achieve that goal this year. And our JEA Tower commercial customer satisfaction, we're very proud of our results there, that we were able to achieve those. The rest of those, the metrics, while they compare favorably to our peers, did not meet our goals, our performance-related goals for our pay for performance program for the year. Under the program that was rolled out at the beginning of the year, the achievement of these 2 goals would result in a payout of 2.04% of salaries for our employees, or about $3.2 million. From a process perspective, these results will be audited by our internal audit team. We'll bring them back to the board as a consent item to confirm that the audit results are consistent with the ones that are reported here, and that consent item will go in the board package for next month. Let me pause there and just see if there's any questions about performance for the last fiscal year.
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. Mr. Campion?
No, I'm good.
Ms. Johnson?
No, thank you.
Ms. Green?
Not at this time.
Reverend Newbill? Ms. Flanagan?
I'm good.
Mr. Cumber?
Just one question. Hate to break the streak. We've always talked about in the past that we needed 2.5% customer growth to break even on revenues. And what we've seen this past fiscal year is we had 1.6% growth, so below the 2.5, but we actually had 2.6% growth. And so our people's efficient use of electricity reducing, and that's why we saw a growth, even though a growth in sales, even though we didn't see a 2.5% growth in customers, or am I looking at sales and revenues incorrectly?
That's a great question. The rule of thumb is on a weather normalized basis, we need between 2 and 2.5% customer growth just to keep up with the efficiency gains that we're getting in our customer base. But that's weather normalized, and we did not have a normal weather year this past year. And so that difference that you're seeing is really driven primarily by the cold winter.
Okay. And remind me, was it 1 hurricane in the last fiscal year or 2 that are incorporated in these results?
We did not have any
didn't have
hurricanes
any,
last fiscal
okay.
year. Hurricane
Okay.
Irma impacted our system in the middle of September, which would have been the prior fiscal year, but we were certainly still recovering from Hurricane Irma during the first months of this fiscal year.
Great, thank you.
I have one question, and it's directed to Ms. Dykes and perhaps Mr. Johnson. On the two large water main breaks, were those aging systems? Were there other environmental contributing factors to those large breaks? And is there any provision in our current $1 billion capital CapEx plan on the water wastewater side that would address that magnitude of a break?
It's a great question, and I'll speak from memory and then commit to following up if I get any of this wrong from memory. The two that occurred, one was a relatively new pipe that had some issues with respect to the original construction of the pipe. That's what was revealed by our root cause analysis around that one. We've hopefully addressed through our policies and procedures the issues that came up as a result of that one. But it wasn't aging infrastructure. It really was. It was more of a procedural issue that caused that. The second one, from memory, I believe was caused by a contractor, and it's just the locates were done properly, and it was an accident that occurred. But I'll follow up with you and just make sure I get you more details on that. We do a root cause analysis on all of these to make sure that we can prevent as many as we can.
Right, I knew that. Thank you very much. More? Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Everybody good? No. Thank you, Ms. Dykes.
Thank you.
Mr. Zahn, the contribution agreement extension.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a continuation of a conversation that began in June with the Board of Directors and has continued iteratively around the divestiture of Southside Generating Facility, which was about $18.8 million of cash from a non-budget or non-core asset, and the concept of stepping out as JEA as a thought leader in the community relative to solving a decades-old problem of septic tank phase-out. What this contribution agreement is, and if you recall, the board passed a unanimous resolution at the last board meeting giving me authorization to negotiate with the city and as well as the administration to see if we could reach a final resolution that could be submitted for city council final approval and go through the formal charter change process, which would be about 90 days from this board's approval. What you have in front of you is a draft of those documents, both the charter change, which is a relatively simple amendment. It effectively extends the term of that charter from the original 5-year period expiring in 2021 to out to 2023 while maintaining all of the terms and conditions as status quo. So effectively giving JEA, as we discussed, and I think Director Kummer, at his urging, gives us a 5-year window of stability, which the rating agencies obviously view as favorable, as well as for us, it gives us some ability to be able to execute on a strategic plan once it's implemented. Secondly, it amends the interagency agreement for the one-time $15 million contribution, bringing JEA's commitment to this issue in the city up to about $30 million. As well as has a small amount of money for replacement of river gauges, for monitoring river levels, for storm preparation, that kind of thing. On top of that, if during the last charter negotiation a number of years ago, JEA had committed to the city a number of water credits that go for nutrient reduction, BMAP credits is what they're called, Basin Management Action Plan. What this does is it continues the contribution of those credits to the city in perpetuity, as well as gives the additional credits that will be generated by the SJRPP shutdown to the city. So from JEA's perspective, these are non-budget related items. They effectively have a significant value to the city, but to JEA at this time don't have significant value. That is the high-level elements of the kind of what we're giving in return for a high degree of stability in our contribution agreement over the next 5 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahn. Before we open the floor for discussion, may I have a motion to approve the contribution agreement extension?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Yes.
Second.
Mr. Campion recognized for the second. Any discussion on the extension of the contribution agreement? Ms. Flanagan?
Just to clarify, Mr. Zahn, this continues for 2 years under the current formula and framework that is already in place and what we're familiar with today.
Correct. If you were to look at, and I'm looking for the amendment itself. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one.
Right, I saw that.
If you were to look at the top of page 5 of the charter, which is this page. What you see is the continuation of the floor increased at the same percentage year over year as it has over the last number of years, and it is forecast to do through 2021, just taking it out to 2023.
Mr. Cumber?
One comment, a couple questions. One, Mr. Zahn, I want to thank you for negotiating this. As you mentioned, I think it's important for us to have this stability for the rating agencies to show that we've extended this contribution agreement with the city. Just a couple things on the credits that we are going to be extending. I think the word you used was indefinitely. Is there ever a point where JEA would need these credits to meet any regulatory requirement? And if so, is there a clawback to ensure that we don't end up giving away credits and some point in the future we're actually having to come out of pocket to buy credits because we've already given away those that we have?
So I'll let Jody answer that question more specifically if my answer doesn't encompass everything. But there is a regulatory change provision that is incorporated into the interagency agreement that does address any changes in regulatory items from the state level.
Jody, could you point me to that language?
Yeah, if you look in the actual agreement that's currently with the city, that's being amended, for the section 4 of the BMAP credits, but there's a provision in here, a regulatory provision. Let me find it real quick.
I think it's 410.
Yeah.
On page 5 of 18 of the interagency agreement.
Yep.
And Jody, you feel that that language gives us the flexibility we would need if we had to come out of pocket to?
That's correct.
Okay.
But there's also read the last line of that provision too, that it potentially could open up the annual contribution assessment as well, if we're not able to provide them.
This was contemplated in at the prior negotiation.
Not a
No.
change.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, this is the current existing
This is the
agreement that's being
existing, so-
amended.
Correct,
So-
but now we're going in perpetuity with these credits, or we're going for
what-
10 years, sorry, we're going 10-year
10-year
blocks.
10-year
cycles,
blocks.
right?
And
then
both
we
parties
reevaluate.
need to agree in order to extend,
Correct.
right? Okay.
And if there's a regulatory change, then what it does is it opens up the city's ability to change the renegotiate the contribution agreement.
Great. And then, just one other question. So on the cooperation of qualified sewer projects, is that just an internal cost allocation, or is that a third-party cost that JEA absorbs on behalf of the city?
Say that again?
So on page 2 of the summary, under cooperation of qualified sewer projects, so point 2, extends carry forward funding for project support not to exceed $3 million cumulative, not to extend more than 2 years past revised agreement term. Are those third-party costs that JEA absorbs, or is that just an internal cost allocation that takes place?
Those are internal cost allocations.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you.
You were so soft-spoken. For the
Sorry.
record, that was internal cost allocations.
And those are not a change from the prior. interagency.
Understood.
Those are-
I didn't know if those were third-party costs or just a cost allocation.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Reverend Newbill, questions on the extension? Ms. Green?
Just a quick question regarding our continual participation after we make this contribution with the city. In section 7, it states that we'll continue to manage and the fund of the study of the water and sewer infrastructure. So does that mean we'll continue to partner how these funds will be contributed within the community?
Yes, the prioritization matrix and process that's currently in place to dealing with septic tank phase-out will continue as it is.
All right. Thank you.
And there was one other point in this, is that we have committed, and we spoke about this as a board back in June, of taking a portion of the 18.8 million as well and stepping out and engaging in a consultant for the benefit of studying new technologies, commercial approaches, to see if there's a way for us to reduce the $2.5 billion issue to something significantly less by approaching it in a different manner than in centralized sewer.
Yeah.
Yes, revenue bill.
So, best estimates with the study, what are the potentials in terms of saving?
You know, I can't answer the question.
Ms. Johnson.
No, I'm good.
Mr.
Thank you.
Campion.
No, just commend the team on, on the timing of this, getting it done. It's a good message to the rating agencies.
If they're listening. I have one question. Is there a secondary market for these VMAP water quality credits that would allow us to assign any value to them?
You know, I'd have to defer to Mr.
Anyone else?
Steinbrucker to probably answer that question.
The answer is yes.
Paul Steinbruck?
They are very specific from a geographic region
I see.
perspective.
That was the perfect talking point. There is potentially, from time to time, a market for them. Water quality credits are extremely location-specific. So they're usually within a certain number of miles of where you're located on the river. Because algae
So the
blooms
concept of another
occur
city having,
proximate to where the nutrient distribution is in the water, as opposed to air emissions credits over the entire United States.
Okay. So we didn't assign a value for purposes of this extension
We
to the
did
VMAPs?
the city has some values that are in their mind, but we did not assign a value.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Any? Councilman, would you like to speak from the city council perspective on the extension of the contribution agreement?
I appreciate the offer, Mr. Chair. I just want to let you know that we, for the last 7 years, from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, we have been under, we got a letter that we have to maintain and get BMAPs, and we were not able to do it independently unless it costs us a lot of money. So this relationship originally started 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been incredibly helpful to the city and a benefit of the city. So I greatly appreciate you moving on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll just add my support for the extension of the contribution agreement for that reason, demonstrating the great partnership between the City of Jacksonville and JEA, and also demonstrating the sort of bold initiatives to help solve longstanding community issues that JEA is adopting. It's something that's been out there for a long time, and you may say it's a little bit, but every little bit helps. So with that, I'll call for a vote. Anybody else have questions, comments? I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the extension, I'm going to ask for a show of hands of the contribution agreement. Please indicate by raising your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Steinbrecher. Thank you, Mr. Zahn. We have Mr. Wash.
Just one point of clarification. So city council now has to approve this.
Thank you.
They have
They
to
do.
approve it.
So what this does is the board's action will then initiate effectively the submittal for legislative approval.
That's right. Thank you for that clarification. Welcome, Mr. Wanamaker.
Thank you, sir.
Budgetary transfers.
Yes, this is an administrative item that we bring to the board each year. It recognizes that administratively, there's a need from time to time to make small budgetary changes in the middle of the fiscal year. This resolution would enable the CEO of JEA to make budgetary changes up to $5 million within the fiscal year. And again, that's on a $1.8 billion budget for the utility. It also provides for any line item changes that are made to the budget at the end of the year to come back to the board after the fact for ratification.
Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker. A point of clarification, this is consistent with past practice, right? Nothing new?
Correct. This is identical to what we've presented in the past.
Thank you. Before we open the floor for discussion, may I have a motion to approve the resolution authorizing fiscal year 2019 budgetary transfers?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. I'll recognize Mr. Campion for the second. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Campion?
I'm good.
Ms. Johnson?
No, I'm great.
Ms. Green? Reverend Newbill? Mr. Cumber? Ms. Flanagan? We ready to vote? All in favor of the resolution, please so indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Okay, we're back to Ms. Dykes. Unless you had something else, Mr. Wanamaker? Thank you.
Actually, we do.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
We added one.
Oh, I'm so sorry. At the very bottom. Yes, you are still on.
Excellent.
New revolving line of credit facility.
Yes, thank you. JEA carries a revolving credit facility in order to bolster liquidity. The rating agencies favorably view revolvers as an excellent source of liquidity and reflect such facilities on our various liquidity ratios. The current size of our revolver is $300 million, with $3 million currently drawn. As the board is aware of, 2 rating agencies recently downgraded various JEA bonds, and further actions are possible. Staff believes that it is advantageous to increase the size of our revolving credit facility to $500 million. Over the years, JEA has cultivated strong relationships across Wall Street and the investor community. As with any relationship, the strength of the bond is most tested in turmoil. JEA's current revolving credit facility with JP Morgan is for $300 million. Between Thursday of last week and yesterday, JP Morgan received credit approval and provided a commitment to increase the size of our revolving credit facility by an additional $200 million to $500 million of total capacity at the same terms and price. This action demonstrates the confidence of a key lender in our ability and our willingness to pay our obligations. We have a couple of representatives from JP Morgan with us today. If it's okay with the chair, I'd like to invite them to say a few words about this commitment.
Yes, please. JP Morgan?
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to acknowledge Heather Talbot, who a longstanding colleague who has had a longstanding relationship with JEA on the credit side. I'm Mark Widener, and we're two of a large number of folks who support JEA, this important relationship, both here in Jacksonville, state of Florida, and nationally. JP has a proud history of standing by our clients, and we appreciate the opportunity to show this support to JEA in a meaningful way. In support of our longstanding partnership, as Ryan said, JP has agreed to an increase of the firm's capital commitment to JEA on the same terms as the existing credit facility. We place great confidence in the leadership of JEA, and we believe in the health of your business. So on behalf of Heather and myself and the rest of our JP Morgan colleagues across the country, we thank you for the business.
Thank you, Mr. Widener. I appreciate the support. All of us at JEA appreciate JP Morgan's support. Thank you very much. Thank you, Heather. Mr. Wanamaker, what's the facility fee?
So the item, well, I'm sorry. So the ticking fee on it is 27.5 basis points. There's a sliding scale, but it's 27.5 basis points.
Thank you. Consistent with the existing facility?
Correct. So the item before you is an action item to adopt a resolution to increase the size of the revolver to $500 million and authorizing the CEO to enter into such agreements. For your convenience, in addition to the resolution, we've provided the changed pages to the previous resolution, which shows the changes from 300 to 500 million and just a handful of other administrative items.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and move the approval of the
Thank you,
amended
Mr.
revolving
Cumber.
credit facility.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Let me open the floor for questions on the motion to approve resolution number 2018-14. Ms. Flanagan.
In section 7.03, page 21 of the document, the red line through the 300 million has been replaced with 30 million. Is that a?
That was an administrative change to make it consistent with the actual agreement itself. The agreement restricts the district energy systems portion of the revolver under the current agreement to 25 million. We're increasing it to 30 million in this case. And so while the resolution approved the full amount, the actual document itself had a lower amount. So we've just made that as a conforming change.
Mr. Cumber.
Ryan, can you just, what's the history of us drawing down on this revolver?
So throughout history, it's varied. Recently, we have not drawn on it. Over previous years, we have used it to fund cash flow needs for capital projects or for fuel inventory, those sorts of things. But it's varied over the last number of years.
And what are the terms on the drawdown?
In terms of the pricing?
Yeah.
So again, it's a sliding scale.
Oh, that's okay. So, but it's
We can draw both taxable and tax exempt, and
understood. And then the fee for, if I read this correctly, the fee is $5 million a year for the revolver.
So there's a provision in the revolver that we have 1% outstanding, and so that's that $5 million.
Understood.
And that's currently in the water system.
Okay, got it. I'm good.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Mr. Campion?
No, again, thanks to JP Morgan for supporting JEA. Excuse me, bit of a cold. And again, it's a testament to the business that it's been, I mean, Thursday to, what day is today? Tuesday? 300 to 500. That's certainly a Herculean task. And to get it done at the same rates pre the downgrade, I think is a testament to JP Morgan's belief in the business and the senior management of the business, and especially your good self. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campion. Ms. Johnson?
I echo the same sentiment to go and get that situated with the same terms is definitely great to see, and certainly appreciate the support. So I'm glad to see it happening.
Ms. Green?
Do we have any feedback to know that this would actually be a positive towards our credit rating downgrade? So the agencies would actually recognize this as a...
They view liquidity facilities such as this, revolving credit facilities, favorably, and it is included in their liquidity metrics for purposes of their rating guidelines. Yep.
It's also a prudent business move, given some of the current dynamics of the market for us.
Not solely
Not
undertaken to...
for credit.
Just for that
There's
purpose.
there's some prudent elements that I'm happy to discuss offline as well.
Okay.
Reverend Newbill?
Well, I really just see this as a smart move. You know, especially being able to negotiate with JP Morgan at the same rate, and it should be positive. So, thanks again for the leadership.
I'll add to the comments of my fellow board members. For those of us who work in corporate finance, this is amazing. I've never seen a $200 million credit facility approved in 3 days on the same terms as preceded a ratings downgrade. I agree with the statements made by my fellow board members that this demonstrates JP Morgan's belief in the sound fiscal strategy and quite frankly, the financial strength of JEA. So I'll just add those remarks and thanks to JP Morgan and their team. And also our team, led by Ryan and Melissa and Mr. Zahn. Any other questions or comments before we put this to a vote? If not, I'll ask all in favor of adopting Resolution 2018-14 to please so indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Great. Thank you very much.
Good work, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Now we're back to
Good job.
Revolving.
yeah. Ms. Dykes.
Thank you. I'm here to present the draft goals for feedback and discussion for fiscal year 2019. Again, I apologize, there's another handout that's been provided at your seat. It's the dashboard that looks like this. And I'll walk through the proposed goals for the next fiscal year. What we've done in setting these goals is consistent with the framework document that the board reviewed and approved several months ago. Our goals for the next fiscal year are to increase the value of JEA now and in the future by increasing customer value, financial value, community impact value, and environmental value. The goals that are on this page are the metrics that support the measurement of each of those 4 buckets of values. We have set these goals below budget, below permit compliance requirements, and in fact, we continue to set very aggressive goals for the operations, even for metrics that we did not meet for this past fiscal year. We've continued to include these bottom 2 sections on this page as metrics we watch, and again, metrics that'll inform the long-term strategic planning process. And the top section is where we're focused on setting the operational goals for the next fiscal year. This set of objectives and key results has been cascaded to the organization. We started on October 1st. We'll continue to cascade all the way through the organization with these corporate goals through the month of October so that we can make sure we have our goals set early in the fiscal year. And I'll walk through some of the goals that are changed versus the dashboard that you've seen for the previous discussion of the wrap-up of goals for the last fiscal year. In particular, under financial value, we have added 2 additional metrics that are used to track financial value for the year. Net write-ups and generation fleet reliability appeared last year. We've added also percentage of net O&M budget to specifically track our performance on O&M spend, and a cost reduction metric that is tied to strategic initiatives that result in systemic or structural cost reductions for the organization, and we have goals now tied to each of those. We have also changed our goal with respect to nitrogen to the river. As we talked about, if you've got large construction projects that are underway, that does change your nitrogen impact on the river. It's a known change that can be anticipated in connection with these construction projects, and we have a very large construction project that we are undertaking in this next fiscal year at Buckman. And so we've increased the goal for nitrogen to the river to 616 tons for fiscal year 2019. We still believe that's a stretch goal for us, but it reflects that construction project that'll be underway for the next couple of years at Buckman. Other than that, I'll pause and take any questions you have on the goals for fiscal year 2019.
Thank you. Mr. Campion?
Just taking it all in.
Yeah, it's a lot. Ms. Johnson?
No, none right now.
I'll go around a second time. I'll give you all a chance. Ms. Green?
Safety. So when we look at 2019 and we look at the customer, financial, community impact, and environmental, how are we highlighting safety for 2019?
Safety is a goal under community impact value. We've kept the goal at a 1.40 recordable incident rate, even though we missed it for last year. We ended up at 1.48. The 148 is better than we've been in about a decade, but it's not good enough. And that goal recognizes that. We've started this fiscal year, unfortunately, with a recordable already in the month of October, but we're going to work hard to programmatically roll out some changes that we hope will impact that safety number this year. And so we continue to stretch ourselves on that goal.
Thank you.
Reverend Newbill? Mr. Cumber?
Couple comments. And actually, if I could maybe make a comment, and Pastor Newbill, if we go around again, maybe you'll want to address it, but I have no context on the JSEB spend. I was surprised to see that our goal is below what our actuals were for 2018. I know that's been a big priority for you specifically and just the board, so I was just curious as to why we'd want to communicate publicly that we're actually going to pull back from the successes this year. So I'll start there.
That's a great question. What we do is we look at eligible JSEB spend, which is a function of our total overall spend. And so we formulate our targets based on that. We exceeded our expectations for last year, which is why we pulled back on the goal for next year. But we're happy to take another look at that.
It's sized appropriate to the capital plan and then the qualified amounts.
Understood. It's just below 17 and 18, so I would, I just ask you guys to take another look at it and maybe follow up with my fellow board member to.
I don't have my glasses today, so I can't see anything except you guys.
On the board there, too.
So,
but I concur certainly.
I'll mention the numbers just so you know. So the goal for 2019 is 13 million. In 2018, it was 15.688 million as an actual. In 2017, was 13.365 million. So. So maybe I'll just make my comment, and then Melissa, maybe you and Mr. Zahn could follow up with Pastor Newbill and just make sure that we're comfortable there. The other couple things on semi-5, great success this year. Just curious as to why we held that at 1, if we're making significant progress in reducing that.
1.00, it's worth noting, is below the industry average. It's below where the investor-owned utilities post on this particular metric. And actually, semi-5 is just a phenomenal story for us.
Right.
We operate at a different voltage than most other utilities in the United States. And because of that, in the distribution system, we have longer runs. And Mike's going to cringe when I try to talk technically about his system. But we've got longer runs, and so our outages have the potential to impact more customers. So when we started down this journey of trying to influence this particular metric, we weren't confident we'd be able to, frankly, compete with the investor-owned utilities in the state. And we are now showing results that are better than the investor-owned utilities in the state. So we'll continue to challenge ourselves to post these very excellent results, but we felt like a 1% was an appropriate goal, given the challenges and the differences in our own distribution system voltage.
I'm gonna hope you're sandbagging us, and you guys come back with a 0.40. How about that? And then on the cost reduction metric, if we were going to reduce our cost by 1%, what would that number be? If we had that as a goal? I'm just trying to understand. in
Which
context.
cost?
Well, the 9.1 million, we have a cost reduction metric. I assume that means
yeah.
reducing our operating and maintenance costs by 1%.
This isn't just, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
This isn't just O&M costs. What we've done is actually built this from the bottom up. What we're looking at is doing some pretty big changes with respect to how we procure certain goods and services that are used throughout the business. And so this is looking at the buckets of spend that we have specific projects to go after this year and targeted amounts for each of those, and then building up to this $9.1 million number. So we didn't do, when we started the journey on the cost reductions, we went top down. This individual year goal is actually built bottom up.
And I would submit that if the board recalls, the plan for the company is to initiate a strategic planning process starting in December, which would be a full review of not only the cost structure, but also the strategies of the entire company. And so this 9.1 really tails back to some work that was done a couple of years ago in terms of identifying specific initiatives. And there has not been an additional effort around cost-saving metrics for 19 because of the specific work that's intended to be done as the strategic planning update.
What's worth noting
I think you're
is-
hitting where my mind is, which is, I think there's the opportunity to be more aggressive given the environment that we're in. And I would challenge you as a management team collectively to be more aggressive.
I couldn't agree more. What's worth noting is we started on this most recent cost reduction initiative in 2016. So relatively recently, and our goal was over 3 years to reduce our costs by $40 million a year, and we have significantly exceeded that goal.
More sandbagging, Hussein.
Yeah, I think so. Last two things. I have no context, but I did the math. You know, you guys had activities for JEA volunteers, and it said 4,800 hours. We have 2,000 employees, so that comes out to a little less than 2.5 hours per employee per year. It seems low to me. I'm not going to mandate a number there, but again, I feel like all the stuff I hear you guys doing in the community, I got to believe you're exceeding the 4,800 hours, but so I don't know if that's another sandbag number. But then my real last question is pension. So on the metrics that we just went through for 2018 actuals and this, can you just give us a highlight of how we ended the fiscal year in 2019, just on how that pension gap is looking for us?
In terms of unfunded liability
Yes.
for SJRPP or for the City of Jacksonville's pension plan?
For both.
Why don't we come back to you? Can we come back to you on that answer?
Sure.
That work?
Right. Ms. Flanagan, questions on the corporate goals?
I may have been in the midst of digesting, and you may have explained on the nitrogen to the river increase. Was that due to increased projects?
There's one large construction project that's going to happen at Buckman that's going to cause us to have to take certain portions of the plant offline during construction. That's going to result in an increase in nitrogen, and it sort of is what it is. It's a construction project we have to do, and we'll do our best to control the amount of nitrogen that's emitted, and we don't expect to be anywhere near our permit limits, but it is certainly going to increase our nitrogen for next year.
Thank you.
I'm going to give a second bite at the apple to this side of the table. Mr. Canton?
No, I'm fine.
Ms. Johnson?
Just a question on thought process when setting up the goal for the water unplanned outages. So the goal was 3, we're going to 2, but we're coming in at 5. Just what's kind of the thought process behind that and lowering the goal?
It's another, it's, in my opinion, a good example of us continuing to challenge ourselves even in areas where we missed for last year. So last year we were impacted by a couple of very large incidents that have impacted a large number of customers. And actually, I'm glad you asked the question because it gives me a chance to circle back to my incorrect answer earlier. One of the outages was caused by an original construction issue, and that is an issue that's being addressed. The second largest one was actually a thin-walled pipe that is now in our plan for capital replacement. It was number 3, that was the contractor. So I misstated that earlier. Without those large incidents, we would have been much closer to the goal that we're setting for next year. So we're hopeful we'll go into this year without having those very large incidents that we've had this year.
Good. I like that.
Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newville?
Yeah, I want to concur with Board Member Cumber, but I also want to inject as it relates to JSAB. One of the problems that I'm getting from our partners is concerning primes, and some of those companies that's been our partner for a number of years really seem to meet the qualifications on some of these projects. And they feel in some cases that we've just become accustomed to using certain people, and so they are not even considered in some of these projects. So I would really love for us to motivate management to take a fresh look at our partners as it relates to JSAP.
I appreciate that feedback, and Reverend Newbill, I appreciate your personal engagement in so many of our JSEB events. You were at our first annual JSEB Summit just last month or the month before, and that was one of the pieces of feedback that we received from that summit. It is something that we've taken back and are trying to look at some of our minimum qualifications and procedures to see if we can't increase the number of prime contracts.
Any other questions on corporate goals? Mr. Zahn?
So I will say to the board, part of my instructions to the team and to the company were to set goals for 2019 that were just right down the middle of the fairway, with the concept that sequentially, if you can have right down the middle of the fairway goals, you can focus quite a bit of time on a strategic plan update, which will be far more comprehensive and look at a bottoms-up cost-saving analysis. That's much easier in terms of management approach, as opposed to trying to set very aggressive goals for an annual one-year approach, while also then revamping the entire look at the business. And so if the board wants to talk to me, I'm happy to take those conversations offline, but that's kind of a philosophical direction that was set for 2019.
Thank you. Before we put it to vote, Ms. Dykes, can you also speak to the how deep down in the organization you got buy-in and contribution on these goals? It's not an SLT initiative.
It is not. It's one that essentially goes both directions as part of the goal-setting process. So what we've done since October 1st is we've had a very collaborative meeting that included all the directors, where we as SLT members set our goals for the year. They've all set their goals for the year, and now they're in that collaborative process working with their managers at an all-hands meeting that's coming up actually tomorrow. And so we'll continue that process through the organization. But this incorporates feedback on how realistic and viable each of these goals are from throughout the organization. So this is not strictly a top-down trying to figure out exactly what makes sense for the organization. It's one that has included collaboration and input throughout the organization.
Thank you. I wanted the board to know that because in my experience, to the extent you get the people who are actually responsible for delivering on a goal to be involved in setting the goal, you have a much greater chance of meeting that goal. And to my commendation to Mr. Zahn, Ms. Dykes, and the entire senior leadership team for getting that buy-in from 400 of our managers up and down. So thank you. If we're ready, I'll call for a vote on the 2009. Oh, it's informational?
Yep.
Oh, wow. I like it. We should approve it.
I'd be happy to take the approval.
Back to Mr. Wanamaker and Mr. McEnall.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Howard, how are you? Good afternoon again.
Hello.
You again.
Yes. You're driving. I am. This is a follow-up to our fuel strategy discussion last month. We wanted to take the opportunity to come back and have a deeper discussion around some of the strategies from last month. In particular, we are going to take a deeper dive on fuel hedging, gas prepay contracts, and fuel diversity. Steve, talk about hedging first.
Okay, pardon me. So at the end of 2017, we executed a hedge for 2018 for 60,000 MMBtu a day. That represents roughly 40 to 45% of our average daily gas burn. Starting this summer, we looked at doing the same thing for 19, 20, and 21, seeing that the forward curve was what they call backwardated, so the future prices were lower than the current prices. We were successful in, we set a target based on our fuel rate, and we're successful in executing hedges for 20 and 21 for 60,000 a day for the calendar strip, and also an extra 10,000 a day for the summer and winter peak periods. 2019 was outside of the goal that we'd set, and it's still outside of the goal. In fact, it's a little further outside of the goal, so we're still looking at that. I would point out that our 2018 hedge, we went in place December 22nd of 2017, so it really does go down to the wire sometimes. As 2019 comes in, we'll plan to look at 2022 and keep the hedges rolling. This is important because with the taking Power Park offline and decommissioning it, our fleet is much more reliant on natural gas. So having a stable natural gas price becomes a way to protect against fuel increases. So the gray bars on the chart show how much of our expected burn is we have locked in. Blue price, the blue line is the current market. Red is our budget, so we can, and then the diamonds represent our various hedge positions. So you can see that we're very well placed versus market and well below our budget. So it is protective of our 32.50 fuel rate.
Gas prepays. Gas prepays are one of the best tools that municipal utilities have to lower the cost of natural gas. Prepayments allow municipal utilities to use tax-exempt financing to lock in a long-term energy supply at below market pricing. We believe these transactions can save JEA more than $5 million per year. So what is a prepayment and how does it work? At a high level, in a gas prepayment, a municipal utility will sell tax-exempt bonds to prepay for a long-term supply of natural gas from a supplier. The prepayment amount provides funding for the supplier, and the prepayment is calculated based on the supplier's cost of capital. The municipal issuer captures the positive value between the supplier's cost of capital and the tax-exempt bond rate, which it then passes on to customers. It's important to note that the municipal utility is only locking in a discount to index and not the actual price of the commodity. Prepayments have a long history, and I know this is another eye chart for everyone. But over the past 15 years, there have been 52 transactions totaling over $38.4 billion. In case you were wondering what Melissa and I were doing in the early 2000s, this slide gives you a flavor of that. The pink delineations there are transactions that were structured by either Melissa or myself. So you have a management team that's well-versed in these transactions, as well-versed as anyone in the industry. Melissa and I collectively have structured more than $6 billion of these transactions, representing 16% total market since 2003. If you look closely at the dates, there was a lot of activity in 2006 and 2007, and then it kind of dropped off for a few years. And has recently seen a bit of a resurgence. The biggest driver for that drop-off was simply interest rate levels. As I discussed at the beginning, the transactions generate value based on capturing the difference between the supplier's cost of funds and the municipal issuer's cost of funds. And so as the credit crisis hit and the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates for 10 years, these low rates compressed the differential between taxable and tax-exempt rates. As a result, it was difficult to generate the kind of savings that was attractive to municipal utilities. As the Federal Reserve has begun to raise interest rates over the past year or so, the differential has expanded, and these transactions have seen a new wave of deals with over $6.2 billion executed over the past 18 months. So while interest rates are one of the large drivers, there are 5 key variables that drive value that ultimately determine the savings of a particular transaction. We talked about lower tax exempt rates and higher supplier discount rate are beneficial for these transactions, but also higher gas prices, which result in a larger transaction and ultimately creates more savings. As rates go up, higher overall interest rates in the economy are good for these transactions because they generally tend to correlate with a larger differential between taxable and tax-exempt rates. And then finally, the term of the contract. The longer term that you have, the longer that you have to be able to capture that difference between those funding levels. I mentioned rising interest rates in the economy several times. We feel that this is really the main driver of what could be a continued trend in prepayment activity. Of course, I feel like it wouldn't be a good CFO presentation without charts that go up and to the right. So here's the obligatory up and to the right chart. These charts show the differential between tax-exempt and taxable rates since 2017. You can see in early 2017, there was very little differential. It was near zero for both the 5 and 10-year differentials. And as the Federal Reserve has increased rates, this spread has widened. And so we believe that this trend of prepayments is going to continue, and it will really be the beginning of another secular trend for the industry. So in summary, staff believes it's prudent to take a portfolio approach to gas prepayments. The transactions are non-recourse to the issuer and participating municipal utilities. However, in the event of a termination, participating utilities like JEA would no longer receive a discount to the index pricing. And so as a result, many utilities have taken a portfolio approach to prepayments. At a future meeting, staff will ask the board for a delegated resolution to allow for gas prepayments under certain key parameters. And we're currently evaluating those. These include JEA's role as an issuer or as a participant, various supplier counterparties and/or funding structures, minimum savings thresholds, maximum individual supplier exposure, and maximum prepaid volumes. So I would note that this is a high-level presentation, but there are several more detailed slides on the structure in the appendix to this presentation. However, these structures can be quite complicated, and to the extent any board member would like to have a more thorough briefing on the structure, we'd be happy to provide a one-on-one deep dive upon request. Turn it back to Steve. Yep.
If you do ask Ryan for one of those deep dives, just buckle up. All right, so next I wanted to go through the large-scale solar. This is our 5x50 solar that we are really excited about. This is an important part of our fuel hedging because it does lock in lower than the fuel rate, energy rate for the term of the contract and the contract that we're negotiating, and it's actually at a flat price. So relative to inflation, the price will actually decrease. The developer we've selected, and this is through an RFP process, we had over 35 respondents to a request for qualifications. 7 were selected for a short list, 6 responded, and EDF was the winner, primarily based on price, but there were a couple of other elements. Their Electricité de France, it's one of the largest energy companies in the world. We're working with a North American subsidiary, and the cost for the actual PPA is 20% below our fuel rate, or our fuel price. So the negotiations are going well. We're currently in the stage where we've agreed on all the major terms, and it's just a matter of the lawyers making sure that the contract says what we all intended to say. We are expecting that to be finalized in the next month or two. These contracts and these projects support our Solar Max offering as well, which there's been a lot of interest from our large customers just got off a call this morning with another one, and they're looking forward to being able to participate and using these projects to help support their renewable goals. So you've seen this map before, or variations of it. The gold-colored ones are the 5x50. Just wanted to point out the red one in the middle. It's a small 1 megawatt. We're still working on our last batch. It just achieved commercial operation yesterday, so we have 1 more megawatt of solar on the system. And just to show you a little more detail on the 5 that we have. So this is Beaver Street. It's located on the Miller Tract. We've owned that parcel for a number of years. Brandy Branch, our combined cycle, is located to the west, as well as our existing Jack Solar 12 megawatt facility. This is approximately a representation of where the panels would go. So 50 megawatts of solar takes up about 400 acres. Similarly, our Cecil Commerce Solar Center is on the Peterson tract that we've owned for a number of years. The solar would fit at the south end, and we'd take it out to a substation we have located to the east. Deep Creek Solar, it's not as wet as it sounds. This is out at the corner of 301 and I-10. We're going to have some very nice frontage on this as far as people seeing the solar facility on their way in on I-10. There will be signage representing that there's a JEA solar farm, and in as much as our large commercial customers adopting SolarMax, their contracts will be affiliated with a facility, and they'll have signage as well. We're using a small portion of this property, avoiding the wetland areas. We just purchased this one. I think we closed in August. Forest Trail. This is out near the Duval-Nassau border on the Duval County side. It's a smaller parcel, so the solar is going to take up most of it. And then the connection will be going up to the Dinsmore substation, which is not constructed yet. So this will probably be the last one that comes on. And Westlake Solar. Westlake is actually the oldest DRI, Development of Regional Impact, in the state. It's owned by Norfolk Southern, and we closed on this in September, so just before the end of the fiscal year. And that's about where the solar would go. There's a pretty prominent wetland feature in the middle, so solar actually is a really good way to preserve an area, and then we work around the wetlands. The EDF, the company that we're contracting with, they did our existing 7 megawatt facility up at the north side of the airport, and they did a really nice job working around the existing features. It's, if anybody's interested in a tour, be happy to set it up. And just wanted, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but as far as comparing our solar contracts to the nuclear PPA, there's only one similarity between the two, and that's that they're both for around 200 megawatts. 200 megawatts of nuclear, 250 of solar, and they're both for 20 years or more. And that's it. Everything else besides that is completely different. On the solar, we only pay for energy. We own the land and the interconnection, and the pricing is below our fuel rate. Like I said, we're not going to go through these in detail, and this comparison is just on the contractual terms. Doesn't represent what we actually think. And we'll come back to the board with our completed negotiations with the solar contract. So I'm just going to flip through those and go to questions. Or Brian has his appendix after this.
We're not going to go through the appendix. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Wanamaker. Questions? Mr. Campion?
It's good price.
Yeah. Ms. Johnson?
None for me. Thank you.
Green, Reverend Newbill.
Yeah, if you had to project, I know you said 20% lower cost, If you had to project, how long do you think those numbers will hold?
Well, so the 20% below is the contract price. If we work in the price of the land and the interconnection, which we're paying for, it comes out almost exactly to our fuel rate. The price in the contract is flat. It's flat for 25 years. So it's only going to become if our fuel rate increases, as fuel rates most often do, then it's only going to become a greater savings over the fuel rate.
Okay.
What price of gas is that based on?
That's based on about 270 gas. So even today, where gas is up around 325, if we had it already, it would be considerably cheaper than our gas dispatch. Of course, it's not dispatchable, but at that price, we'll take as much as we can get.
Mr. Cumbert?
I'm good.
Ms. Flanagan?
Apologies if I'm slow on the uptake here.
It's okay.
Are these representations of things that are already, it's land that we already owned? The solar implementation is a prospective project that we could choose to do, or one that's already in the works?
So we own 4 of the properties now. We already owned 2 beforehand, and 1 is under contract. The 3 that we've acquired were specifically for the purpose of putting these solar developments on, and we identified land on our 2 existing parcels. The representations here are, we had a consultant basically just fit, can we put a 50 megawatt facility on this land? I didn't want to be the guy who was responsible for buying 400 acres of land that I couldn't put solar on. That seemed to be a career limiting move. So that's those aren't exactly where they'll be. Where EDF will have the freedom to fit them where they need to. But that is what we're planning to do with the parcels.
Director Flanagan, these solar projects were awarded by were approved by the board sometime in 2017. Since then, the RFP has gone out. Respondents came in, shortlisted, and then a selection has been made. What we're bringing is an update, and so final contract with all the final terms and conditions will be submitted back to the board once finally approved, but wanted to give kind of a substantive update on where we are today.
Any other questions? Mr. Camp?
One last question. What's the average heat rate?
Depends how hot it is.
Oh, no, the rest of the installed capacity.
Oh, on the rest of the fleet?
Yes.
Well, we've only got 1 combined cycle. The heat rate there is about 7,300. We've got a large PPA from Wansley up in Georgia, 200 megawatts. For a couple of years, it's about the same. And then the rest of our, as far as the coal units and the CTs, it's about a little over 10,000, right around there.
Energy geek speak. So the solar's sexy, but I don't want to have glossed over the $5 million in savings this year on the hedging program that you guys adopted in 17. Thank you. That goes to benefit all of JEA's customers. The gas prepays, I applaud and encourage those efforts. It's an unrecognized fact that JEA has some of the most talented energy and finance executives in the municipal utility industry, and they demonstrate that value to us time and time again. So thank you, Steve, Ryan, Melissa, your entire team. What you are doing makes a real difference to our customers. So thank you for that presentation.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Kilgo, the long-awaited new campus update. Welcome, Ms. Kilgo.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Going to give a brief update on the corporate headquarters planning. We released yesterday afternoon a little late. Your board packet says the week of December 8th, so one workday late. Through CBRE, a solicitation that we call an invitation to negotiate to the development and real estate community. That information will also be linked to the JEA procurement webpage. We engaged CBRE for additional development advisory services to help us with the project as it became much more complex as we thought about requesting responses from the public in general rather than doing a self-build. So the information was posted along with several exhibits and addenda. We will have a pre-bid meeting on November 7th that will be held here for interested parties to come and get more information and ask questions. Their questions will be due to us by December 14th. Responses are due to JEA and CBRE on January 8th of 19 in order that we might bring the short list to the board for its consideration at the January 19 meeting. We encourage in the document to include local participation as far as partners, labor, etc. We know the sites will be located here. We've asked for long-term lease, lease-to-own, or purchase scenarios. Part of CBRE's value is that they work in these complex transactions all the time and will be able to help us do the financial and qualitative evaluation. We will continue to use the criteria that the board provided recommendation from your August board meeting. And I would encourage everybody that we have a period starting yesterday of no ex parte communication. So I want to encourage the board and JEA employees that happen to be listening or involved that we're not to really have discussions with prospective people that would respond to the solicitation during the time they're developing their responses.
Thank you, Ms. Kilgo. I note that this is a little bit longer timeline than the board had previously discussed. The recommendation of management, which I concurred with, was to engage CBRE or an outside consultant, which turned out to be CBRE, to assist in this process. With no disrespect whatsoever to Ms. Kilgo, Mr. McCarthy, and their teams, they do a great job. But this is a large and very important undertaking. I think that it's the right move to engage CBRE to assist us in the selection process and in the ITN that's been prepared and published. Look, whatever decision is made is going to be subject to criticism from some sector. I appreciate the ability to select CBRE as an independent third party to assist us in this process. And if people want to throw bullets, we'll put them in front of us. So thank you for that update. Any questions for Ms. Kilgo? Questions?
Is there any language as it relates to whomever the companies are as it relates to JSAB numbers?
There's no specific JSEB language, although there is the local participation encouragement and additional points would be awarded. We could certainly have that as part of the scoring criteria, but if we're not the builder, it may be hard to guide that, but certainly we'll have encouragement that they consider local firms and JSEB firms.
Please do. Thank you.
Appropriate. Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Other questions? Number?
So I was reading through this. Nancy, what did you say you hope to achieve on January 19th again?
That we would bring a ranked short list to the board for its consideration to perhaps select the number one ranked firm or a firm that you might reorder the ranking, and then we would proceed to negotiate a contract from there.
So the only thing I'm a little surprised about is I think the 3 months you have this out for is like the bare minimum. Because someone's got to lock up a piece of land, they need to, but to have bids come in and 11 days later to say that you're bringing a recommendation of a short list to the board for us to act on, I don't think that sends a very good signal to the market that we're, this is a large undertaking, and to think that we're going to turn it around in 11 days, knowing that we would need that a few days earlier just to be able to go through it. I'm surprised that it's squeezed on the back end. Is there a reason why you're giving yourself 11 days to come to the board?
So in part, we were encouraged to get this done quickly. We've been waiting a long time. It's important. And we wanted to allow ample response, although I think that is also still a little short of what the time we're giving people to respond. These are going to be very big packages. We'll have a team that will focus on this between the submittals and getting the information to the board.
How long do you expect for us to be in this new building?
15 to 30 years.
So I would just put that into context on you're saying you want to do this quickly, and you're going to make a decision on something that we will have as an asset to JEA for the next 15 to 30 years.
Director Comer, we have complete discretion and flexibility to adjust the calendar as need be on the back end.
Understood,
So
but
this is purely a plan.
Understand. Let me finish. If you are going to tell the market that in 11 days, because what you did today is you told the market, in 11 days we're going to come up with a short list to the board, what you are communicating to the market is you've got some idea already in mind that you're going to bring us. And I don't think that's the right message to send to the market. I just, having gone through these myself, I have a background in real estate, to communicate that to the public, I think you're going to unfortunately signal to interested parties that they may not invest the time if they don't think you're investing the time on the back end to take their proposal seriously.
Mr. Cumber, are you suggesting that we should extend the consideration time from 11 days to a longer period of time, or the entire process?
No, just I'm fine with the 3 months. I think 3 months is the shortest you would want to be out. So I'm happy with the 3 months. Could it be longer? Yes, but I could live with the 3 months. But I do feel like when you get these packages, you're going to want to have the opportunity to have these folks come in, explain their responses to you, go back and forth and have some feedback. So by the time you come to the board, we're not getting a kind of a summary. And then I feel like you're putting the decision on us to have to really go through these packages without having ample time. I feel the back end is very rushed. And like I said, I feel that sends a signal to the market. I like people to be able to look at this and say, there is time on the back end for them to really evaluate these proposals coming in and ask questions and have follow-up conversations. I just don't think the board should be the body that is engaging in those types of follow-up discussions. And with 11 days on the back end, I feel like that's the position you're putting the board in.
Mr. Cumber, are you suggesting maybe we should recommend to staff that they amend the ITN guidelines to allow for 3 weeks or some other period of time for review of proposals that get submitted?
We just bump it from January to February. We just, we do a special board meeting. If this is going to be something that we want the proposers to come in and present to us, I'm happy with a special board meeting. That gives us a little more time, and we make that the one single agenda item. I just feel like this is an asset we are going to be in for 15 to 30 years. I'd hate to see us rush it.
Is there anyone from CBRE present? No?
They were.
They left.
Yep, there's Stuart.
Mike.
While he's walking up, let me be real clear. There are absolutely no preconceived notions of JEA in terms of where we're looking at. The ITN is very specific in terms of the specifications we're looking for. I appreciate, Director Comer, your comments, and certainly we can, as a management team, adjust accordingly. But the concept or notion that we're signaling market, I just want to make sure we're very clear. There are absolutely no preconceived notions of this management team, and I don't believe of the board. And certainly the ITN process itself and the work done by Ms. Feasy and that entire team, they're attempting to be as comprehensive as possible to the extent that the board sees fit to have additional direction. We can easily adjust, and that's the benefit of the process that we've been envisioning.
I'd just like to ask the CBRE guys that we're going to push in front to take the bullets for us. Do you have a concern about the amount of time reserved for evaluating proposals? Mr. Cumbers indicated he's concerned 11 days might send the wrong message, too time compressed. And if so, what would you recommend as the experts we've engaged as a suitable amount of time for review of proposals?
I think we believe.
I'm sorry, your name?
I'm Mike Carroll with CBRE. I think we believe that it's a very compressed time frame, particularly on the back end. There's going to be, depending on how many responses we get, quite a bit of financial analysis to go through. We've got a team of analysts that's standing by when we receive the responses, but that will require quite a bit of analytical work. Another overriding concern is control of a site. There are going to be, we expect, multiple developers who will respond, and they're going to be responding on multiple sites. It's unrealistic to expect that anyone will control a site between now and January, other than those that already have a site. So more time is better. In terms of if we could gain additional time, I think an additional 30 days, sometime in February would be, appropriate. And
Excuse me, a total of 30 days or 41?
From if you move it to your February board meeting, I think that's sufficient time for everyone to get proposals in on or about the same date. And leave us sufficient time to perform both the qualitative and quantitative analysis.
Okay.
And your selection committee will need additional time as well to go through what I expect to be multiple proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Terrell. Any questions of CBRE or Ms. Kilgo on this? Mr. Cumber, additional questions?
Let me just ask you, since you're up here, is on the front end of the 90 days, are you guys comfortable with that timeline?
We spent last week calling a number of both local, regional, and national developers to give them a heads up that the solicitation would be coming out, because we're bound by the same cone of silence as you are after the solicitation goes out. So we gave a lot of them a heads up. All of them acknowledged that's a pretty compressed time frame, but we didn't get any real pushback from anyone.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm fine on the front end of the timeline. For my comfort, I'd like to see maybe we push this out to February. That would be my recommendation.
Listen, as you pointed out, it's a very important decision in the life of the company, and the reality is that I'm not sure an extra 30 days is going to make a whole lot of difference if it helps us get it right. I don't need a vote on this, but is there an expression of interest from the board that we're okay directing management to extend it?
Yes, I agree.
Any objections? Yeah. Ms. Kilgo and CBRE would make that adjustment. That'd be perfect. Any other questions for Ms. Kilgo or CBRE? Thank you for your efforts. Thank you, Ms. Kilgo. Thank you, Mr. Cumber.
Thank you.
Mr. Zahn, sorry, your time's short. Keep it brief. Sure.
In April, I discussed with the board and have repeatedly updated you on a high level of transition plan, which you all know there's many actions underneath this. Happy to report that the transition we laid forth from one permanent CEO to another is complete, approximately 3 months earlier than I think was anticipated. There are 2 open items, which is one, somebody to identify, the board to identify a director to work as a liaison with a strategic planning consultant and the senior management as we move forward past December. Not sure an action needs to be taken at this time. And obviously hiring a permanent CEO, which I know is currently underway. There is provided in your package a document called Guiding Principles, Year of Innovation. What I'm happy to report is this is a recast of vision, mission, corporate measures, core competencies, as well as the cultural values of the company. You can see the structural setup. This was building upon the strategic framework that the board of directors had approved previously, and has the input and consensus of approximately 400 of our employees. And so it was an iterative process that took a number of months, and I will assure you we received quite a bit of feedback and buy-in as we went through this process. At this point, I view it merely as a draft and a good starting point for strategic planning process, not necessarily one that needs action at this time, but it kind of shortcuts a lot of what I would say is time that is spent during strategic planning that could be really well spent on initiatives and specific growth capabilities. The points of progress and points of concern I'm not going to review. You can review those at your leisure and come talk to me. I kind of look at those as a synopsis of where we are in the transition. And it's been a pleasure. I want to thank the board for all of the input, guidance, and collaboration. This certainly was a highly complex situation to step into and to work through over the last 6 months, and couldn't have done it without you. And as well as our senior leadership and the directors and management of the company, I got to tell you, having done their entire day jobs as well as contribute to working through this, and it's, as you all know, gaining consensus of 400 people is not an easy task, and especially when they're highly engaged and thinking about what they want the business to look like for the next 10 years. So I couldn't have done it alone. It's definitely a massive team effort, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. I also echo his thanks to the senior leadership team, the directors and managers, and especially you for undertaking this. It didn't come in your interim CEO job description, but I applaud you for undertaking the effort, succeeding in getting the buy-in of your senior leadership team and your leadership in bringing it to fruition. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask a quick question on that?
Of course.
Did we ever get any responses to the letter that you both sent out to council members on the strategic framework?
We did get some responses to talk one-on-one, sat down and just effectively walked them through it. There weren't anything substantive.
And I had 2 council members reach out to me to thank me.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I think Councilman Schellenberg, I don't know if you have an opinion from City Council, but having that strategic framework with those 4 areas of value that allow for us to have a measuring stick for JEA is helpful in terms of gaining alignment with the City Council and the administration.
I think any communication we have with city council to keep them updated without them guessing is a good place to be.
Great.
Diplomatically said.
Any other questions on the transition update, draft guiding principles? No? Ms. Stewart, I'm so sorry we didn't have time for you last month. We don't have a whole lot of time this month. Sorry.
Well, good afternoon to you too, Mr. Chair.
So sorry. It's all those other people in their reports.
I know.
We'll put you at the top next time.
We are here today to talk to you about electrification, and while I know you have his bio in your binder, for the sake of the record and the folks in the audience, I want to introduce the gentleman to my right. This is David Pickles. He is Senior Vice President for Energy, Aviation, and Infrastructure at ICF. David is a Senior Vice President with ICF's Commercial Energy Division, where he leads the beneficial electrification practice and sales team. More importantly for JEA, though, he also leads strategy engagements with utilities across the country, seeking to enter new markets and offer innovative products and services to their customers. So there are 3 things we hope to leave you with today. One is to create an understanding of what electrification is and what it means to JEA today and tomorrow. Secondly, we want you to know and understand and be very proud that JEA has one of the best programs in the country already. We started several years ago with a quantitative and analytical approach, and then implemented a program that our customers love because it's open to a broad range of technologies and can be highly customized to customer approaches, which leads to number 3, and that's our ability to scale these programs and these opportunities for JEA and our customers. So what is electrification? Electrification is the conversion of fossil fuel-powered equipment, machinery, vehicles, or processes to use electricity. Beneficial electrification requires that it be cost-effective for JEA, good for all customers, whether they participate in the program or not, and good or at least neutral for the environment. A growing number of utilities around the country are now supporting electrification through marketing efforts, technical support and incentives for customers, as well as creation of charging infrastructure. Popular examples of electrification are forklifts, electric vehicles, and airport baggage handling equipment. It's important to note that electrification supports all 4 of JEA's core values. Clearly, it supports our financial value by increasing electricity sales and revenue, primarily off-peak. It supports customer value by decreasing average rates, and also electric technologies reduce customers' total cost of ownership. It reduces maintenance cost and lower noise and pollution in the customer's facilities. Electrification supports environmental value since the emissions associated with additional electricity generation are more than offset by the reduction in emissions at the customer site. It also finally supports community impact since incentives for electric technologies can be a powerful tool in economic development packages and encourage additional businesses to locate within the JEA service territory. Since 2014, JEA has been pursuing a 2-pronged approach, addressing both on-road and non-road opportunities. This was one of the first comprehensive electrification strategies to come forward in the entire country. So our on-road program has been effective, and it's more importantly laid the groundwork and foundation for what we believe will be a significant opportunity in the future. Currently, JEA receives about $400,000 in annual revenue based on the approximately 1,000 electric vehicles that were on the road as of the end of 2017. As will be discussed later by David, we're evaluating opportunities to add additional vehicle types such as trucks and buses and to develop additional charging stations throughout our service territory. The non-road program has been extremely successful and is perhaps the most comprehensive and impactful program in the United States. Despite this, we do believe that there are significant opportunities to expand this program. This program addresses a broad range of technologies ranging from material handling equipment to custom industrial process equipment. This program is also high touch for our customers. It provides comprehensive technical support and education while being vendor and technology neutral to the solutions. What I'd like you to take most away from this slide, and David's going to talk about it more later, is that most of this growth in sales, almost 70% of it has been off-peak. Customers love this program, as I stated earlier, and as a result, think significantly more favorably about JEA. There have been almost 300 individual participating customers to date, ranging from very small businesses to large national brands. My favorite quotes are the ones that not only indicate how happy the customers are, but also reveal how influential this program was in their decision to go electric. I also quite like the quotes that the customers admit to being skeptical at first, but then come to rely on JEA as a trusted partner that will keep them aware of new technologies that not only enhance peripheral equipment like forklifts, but equipment that is fundamental to their operations like gantry cranes. While we've made great progress, we believe there's more we could do on both on-road and non-road programs. Our desire is to quadruple the revenue and values from the programs, to put downward pressure on rates, to provide a more flexible and efficient JEA load shape, which David's going to talk to you about, and significantly reduce JEA and our customers' environmental footprint. We're currently validating these goals and the assumption that we can do more by doing a comprehensive study of technologies as well as our current customer base. After a comprehensive search and for qualified consultants, we engaged with ICF to help us with this study. We expect the study to be complete by the beginning of April, and we will be back to you at that time. I'm going to turn it over to David now to tell you a little more about what we're currently doing and what ICF sees as our future.
Welcome, Mr. Pickles.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board today. Just by way of introduction, ICF is a large management, technical, and policy consulting firm, around 5,000 employees across the country, really operating in 9 particular verticals, many of which have direct implications to our work in electrification, most notably our work in the energy industry. our work in transportation policy and planning, our work in the environmental sector, and also our work with customers and customer choice and marketing. So we do everything from strategic planning, is the work that we're doing here today, all the way to having feet on the street and account managers out engaging with customers and helping them make appropriate fuel choices for their technologies. Working with many large utilities across the country, so I think about 13 or so utilities, both municipally owned as well as investor owned, on electrification issues, as well as a similar number of folks in the transportation business, as well as state and local government. Kerry alluded to the power of electrification just a moment ago, but let me underscore a few of those items. We think that a full-scale electrification program can probably increase sales around 0.75% a year for a utility of your size. That, of course, has powerful multiplier impacts on your ability to spread your fixed costs over a larger sales base and keep overall rates low. And we think about a 2% downward pressure on rates is a feasible expectation, while at the same time having a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, although there are some increased emissions associated with electric use. The site-based use associated with the equipment that we're replacing is much more polluting, and so the net is beneficial, as well as the other customer benefits that accrue. So typically, electric equipment has lower maintenance requirements, it's less noisy, it creates less mess in a warehouse, for example. So a lot of reasons to consider electrification. Let me just drill down a little bit on some of the financial drivers and with a quick illustration. JEA's average system load is about, or its load factor is about 55%, which is consistent with other utilities of your size in your climate zone with your customer mix. If we can increase that average utilization from just 55% to 56%, that provides about $14.5 million net annual revenue a year to the enterprise. So after the program costs, after the fuel costs, the net contribution to margin of just that 1% increase is about $14 million a year. And we know that that works because over the 4 years that Kerry mentioned earlier, we're already 40% of the way there. So the existing program that Kerry summarized is already providing around $6 million in net margin to the bottom line. However, there are some things that one needs to be careful of. We talk about keeping loads off peak and how the existing program has driven almost 70% of the loads off peak. This slide is a representation of the load of a couple of different technologies, in these cases 2 different types of forklift, over the 24 hours of the day. And what we want to make sure is that that load is, to the extent possible, not on the JEA system peak, which is roughly between sort of 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. That's the pink area shaded there, and you can see that a traditional forklift, almost all of its charging is off peak, and some of these rapid chargings, there's some opportunity for them to charge in peak, but this is based on actual metering studies with your own clients where we didn't hypothesize how we'd use them. We went out there and measured how they were using them. So this is something that the existing program has been successful with, and we just want to make sure that as we go forward, we're choosing technologies and customers and helping them understand and incent them to be really using off-peak energy. When we think about the programs, we tend to think about them on 3 axes. One is the technologies that we promote. The second is the locations in which we promote those technologies. And the third is the strategies that we use to promote them. Your existing program has focused primarily on on-road and some material handling and a little bit of industrial and custom opportunities work. We think those have been very, very effective and formed a great foundation. But there is, I think, significant opportunity to expand the technologies that we're addressing. So whether it's things like additional industrial process heating and heat treating, whether it's specialized manufacturing processes, whether it's converting medium and heavy-duty vehicles and truck refrigeration units. There's lots of opportunities around expanding that technology base. There's also opportunities to change the places that we do it, so not just home charging, not just workplace activities, but in transit charging, but also encouraging people like Amazon and UPS and FedEx that have distribution facilities locally, having them convert their entire fleets to electric, as well as interest from folks like the Transit Authority, who we know are interested potentially in electrifying some of their equipment, as well as refuse trucks. There's opportunities there too. And then finally, there are opportunities to expand the list of strategies. So far, we've been focused primarily on education and cash incentives. But there's also opportunity to look at special incentive rates. I think there's opportunities to look at financing and partnership planning and regional planning with the Transit Authority. And also, I think importantly, an opportunity to look at things like managed charging. So using equipment to manage when that customer charges their equipment and how they charge it. And ultimately, perhaps, using vehicle-to-grid charging, where in the times of capacity shortage, a plugged-in battery bank can provide power back into the grid. And as we round the corner from traditional generation fleets to a greater percentage of renewables and wind and solar and other things that have less storage capability, the flexibility that electrified facilities have to flex customers' load and provide sort of a managed connection between you and the grid is only going to become more and more valuable. Just to underscore how powerful some of these technologies are, I'll just do a couple of quick examples. This shows the revenue that's associated with a variety of technologies. The first one here is a forklift. One forklift on the JEA system over its lifetime provides almost $20,000 in net margin to JEA. Some of the gantry cranes that we've had great success in at the port, each one of those provides about $700,000 of incremental value over its life when on the system. So lots of opportunities to promote both these and other technologies. I think a refuse truck there is about $16,000 in benefit over its lifetime. So a very powerful tool. As Kerry suggested, JEA is indeed a leader in this space. There are perhaps 40 or so utilities across the country that have on-road electrification personal vehicles. Around 13 or so that have programs in ways similar to JEA's suite. But as Kerry mentioned, JEA's list of opportunities and things that you'll support is much broader. The way that you've engaged customers in a very simple application process, the way that you've worked with trade allies really as a force multiplier, as well as your existing account executive force that has relationships with a lot of these customers. All those things have multiplied to create a program that, as far as I'm aware, has the greatest impact in terms of load generated relative to your system size of anywhere in the country. So you're in good company with lots of other people coming to it, but you're certainly, I would suggest, at the front of the pack. These are some of the things that we're going to be considering in the study that we'll be completing in April, and there's certainly some finer points that needs to be aware of. So locations and loads to avoid. We don't want to be creating incremental demand on any individual distribution feeders that may have capacity constraints associated with them. So we're looking not only at what kind of load do we want to be supporting at what kind of customer, but where physically it would be located on the system. We want to be careful that we're not supporting free riders who are people who would make the electric choice anyway without the program. So how do we differentiate and identify those who are truly new and incremental load versus those who would be taking that action anyway? And the third point I'll emphasize on this slide is the use of multiple perspectives to assess cost effectiveness. And we really used 3 tests to determine whether this is a cost-effective program. The first is the ratepayer impact measure test, or do all ratepayers, whether they participate in the program or not, do they all benefit from the program? We'll be assessing that test for each technology. We'll be looking at each individual participant, and is it beneficial to them in terms of both their operating costs for electricity and other fuels, as well as operations and maintenance requirements. And the third test we'll be looking at is from a total resource cost perspective, or to society as a whole, including impacts on the environment, do we benefit as a society from the switch to electric fuels? And we'll be assessing each one of those perspectives for each technology that we assess in the program. So I won't drag you through all of these, but these are some of the questions that we've been asked to assess in the study. So really building on the foundation that we've created so far, how do we scale that to include other technologies, other locations, other strategies? How do we not create future generation challenges in a capacity-constrained environment? How do we leverage the other programs that JE has going on, whether it's leverage of the data that comes out of an AMI system or the solar program that's going on, or potential storage opportunities? So I think there's important considerations there around integrating that. And then finally, how do you operationalize that? Who do you partner with? How do you leverage your own internal resources or third-party resources that are going to be part of the assessment process? Bumping all of those up against JEA's core values, and I think importantly, being innovative and being bold. We recognize that this is a very important strategic lever for the organization. We understand the pressure on rates that all utilities have nowadays. So how do we make sure that we fully realize the full potential of this strategy as we go forward? What might it look like when we get through the process? Well, I don't want to prejudge where we'll end up, but maybe I have to give you a sense of what can be done. And over the short term, perhaps increasing, by short term I mean the next 3 years, increasing sales a little bit over 2%, doubling that amount over the next 3 years following that through a culmination of things like pilot EV programs, additional charging stations, electrification of fleets, considering where within the JEA fleet we can electrify, as well as city fleets and other locals. So there's an awful lot of opportunity there. We'll be coming to you with some specific recommendations and the real numbers after we get through the broader study. But I do want to underscore that this isn't a hypothetical. There's already a significant pipeline of good opportunities there, whether it's at the port with tugs, or with the ferry, or with additional gantry cranes, which we know that they've been pleased with, whether it's pilots to assess the real vehicle-to-grid opportunity, or whether it's buses, and we know that the Jacksonville Transportation Authority has an interest at least in exploring electric buses with us. So lots of very specific examples to underscore the opportunity. And as Kerry suggested, we'll be going through that process and be done in the April timeframe. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anything to add, Carrie? No. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Pickles or Ms. Stewart? Ms. Green?
Just, I continue to be excited about progress and participation and innovation and efficiency. Just today, talking about, electrification and solar, and, it's exciting. Based on your experience in the utility industry, where is JEA fit? Are we following behind in electrification, or are we a part of are we leading?
Absolutely, I think you're leading.
Awesome.
I think, and it's, we're seeing a real upswing in utility interest across the country, both with municipals, and quite frankly, municipals as a group have been leading in this area because they've had the flexibility to do some things that a traditionally regulated utility might not have. So in general, we look at folks like SMUD, who's got their own electrification programs, and indeed some of the cooperatives that are out there. They're really the ones who have been able to see the benefits, understand how they realize those benefits without the complexities of going through a rate case to realize the benefits. So we see the public sector as being, as a rule, more aggressive. However, the IOUs are very quickly coming to this market. But you've had a longer program with more technologies, with a more customer-friendly design. So absolutely, I think you've been a leader for 4 years.
Thank you. Reverend Newbill, any questions? Ms. Flanagan?
No questions, but complimentary of the work that's been put into this. It's exciting to see the opportunities that await us, and look forward to that next update.
Mr. Cumber?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, I'll echo Ms. Green's comments. Well done. I am pleased and not surprised to hear that JEA is on the forefront of the electrification movement. I would just encourage management to continue to be that force multiplier. I treat this like open source software. Go out and spread the gospel. Tell others what we're doing here, because the more widespread the adoption throughout the country and the industry, the more it will benefit us and our customers. So thank you very much. Thank you to David and ICF. Thank you, Carrie. Mr. Cumber, a brief update on the search committee.
I will be very brief. First off, I want to thank my fellow committee members. They have put in a large investment of time over the last 7 days, and with more time to come. And Kelly, I'm going to thank you as well. Hydrick did an excellent job for us. Gave us a group of solid candidates, and so I know you kind of ran that process and scored them, and I wanted to make sure that I at least acknowledged that your hard work paid off with Hydrick coming in with a great slate of candidates. The selection committee interviewed candidates last week, Tuesday through Thursday. I will hope that the board will understand that we're going to push out the timeline a little bit. As Councilmember Schellenberg mentioned, our board chair had a family situation come up last week. kind of very similar to the comments I made about our headquarters. This is a decision that we're going to make for the long term for JEA. And I felt that it was important for our board chair, being on the search committee, to have the opportunity to finish the interviews that he wasn't able to do last week. And so what we're going to do is push out the CEO search committee meeting that was going to be scheduled for tomorrow to October 31st. And what I'd like to propose is we were going to have the board do interviews on November 6th. We're going to try to push that out to November 13th. So Melissa sent an email to everybody this morning. I'd just ask you if by the end of the day you could check your calendar and get back to her. That would be greatly appreciated. That will keep us on schedule to make the November 27th board meeting. So our decision doesn't get pushed out, but it does allow, like I said, for our board chair to be involved with the process, which I personally felt was very important given the long-term decision we're making. And Board Chair Howard, that's all I have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that report, Mr. Cumber. Any questions for Mr. Cumber? Okay, I have one old business item. Next is old business. The board will recall that the former CEO, Paul McElroy, had a transition services agreement that carried him, according to the terms of that agreement, through September 30 when he resigned. I received a written notification from Mr. McElroy submitting his resignation under that agreement, effective as of September 29. The reason for the one-day difference, to be very candid with the board, is that in discussing the transition with the, I guess, the city pension and payroll folks at the city and here at JEA, he noted there was a financial benefit to resigning one day early. Had anybody thought about that and considered that back in the spring when he resigned, they probably would have scheduled his termination as of September 29th. But I think the value to that one-day early termination is approximately $8,000 in pension value the first year. And of course, I don't know how long he's going to live, but there's additional value rolling forward. So he has submitted his resignation. I've been advised by council that to accept that resignation would require a vote of the board. So I put it out there to the board for consideration whether or not to accept Mr. McElroy's termination or resignation one day early.
I'll go ahead and move that.
Thank you, Mr. Comber. Second by Reverend Newbill. Is there any questions or discussion about that? Any questions? Okay, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of accepting that resignation of Mr. McElroy as of September 29th, so indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, so it's unanimous. Thank you. That's all I have for old business. Is there any new business or open discussion among the board? As everyone knows, under the sunshine, we can't talk to one another except in an open board meeting. So if there's something that anyone would like to raise that we haven't touched upon, anyone? Ms. Brooks?
I just want to acknowledge, we lost a colleague in OGC last week. Gail Petrie passed away, and he did quite a bit of work for JEA, and I just wanted to acknowledge his passing and his work and his work ethic through JEA. Thank you for the consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Gail was a friend and a colleague, and he will be missed.
Chairman,
Mr. Revenue Bill.
I think it's been stated somewhat that what we have now in terms of our senior management and where we're going is vastly different from April to October. And I think that I want to just commend Aaron and Melissa. To be honest with you, in April, I really had some thoughts that maybe we would have problems. But seeing the way they have joined together and made this a smooth transition, and I think was stated by our board member to my left. I'm messing with you here. You said to my right, he was going to get that. But anyway, I think where we are now and where we appear to be going as it relates to electrification, solar, and all that, these are not things that the average or regular utility does in terms of going to J.P. Morgan and extending the credit line. Those are the kind of things that I think that those with great management skills and moving companies into the future, those are the kind of things that they do. And I just really want us to look at, where we're going, the potential for where we're going, and just continue to give them credit for what they're doing.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. I think we can all agree that we've got a tremendous management team, and fortunate to have them. Anything else, open discussion? Mr. Zahn.
Sure. Beg your pardon, I'm going to ask Mr. Wanamaker to join me up here. At this time, I'm happy to report that this, I think, will be the last board meeting of a transition, since I believe, based on the CEO search committee report, the board intends to select a permanent CEO next board meeting. I would again like to reiterate and thank the chairman for his partnership. We've been through some foxholes recently, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Nuclear foxholes.
Yeah, that's right. The entire board also for your collaboration and your professional input. I think your professionalism has set the tone for the entire community with regard to moving ourselves forward out of a very difficult conversation, and most importantly to the entire JEA management team, who I cannot stress has performed at such an extremely high level to accomplish their day-to-day jobs while also driving corporate change. Given the scale and complexity of JEA, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the monumental tasks that have occurred over the last 6 months. Together, we designed and executed on an organizational and situationally complex transition while continuing to maintain an exceptionally run utility operation. We have worked together to debate, deliberate, and ultimately unify around a strategic framework. And as discussed today, some guiding principles that come out of that, which creates significant alignment for the JEA, not only with its board of directors and management team, but also with the city council, the mayor, and our internal and external stakeholders in terms of how we measure performance. We faced head-on, without paying attribution or blame, some significant issues as a company and as leaders of our community, specifically Vogel, privatization, and our corporate culture. We established a corporate innovation process around telecom and dark fiber, integrated distributed energy resources, electrification programs, non-core real estate assets, innovation hubs for looking at new systems and tools, as well as becoming a thought leader on wastewater and water expansion in our city and trying to solve a decades-old problem. In June, we launched a management listening tour. I'm happy to report I've now met a little over 1,000, almost 1,500 of our employees personally, and they are highly dedicated, highly committed individuals, and they had a lot to say about where JEA is headed and where and the roles they want to play, and it's been absolutely wonderful taking their feedback and trying to incorporate it and collect it so that whomever is the permanent CEO will have a wealth of information. And I think we have thousands of ideas that have been submitted to our ideas@jea.com from our employees alone. And they've been cataloged, sorted, and prioritized, and I'm hoping to see many of them come to fruition. As discussed today, the team has undertaken a comprehensive fuel strategy for managing risk around our company's single largest expense item. And we have finalized in our launching plans in looking at being very deliberate around JEA's new headquarters process that started 4 years ago, but candidly is getting quite a bit of attention and very significant push by the team over the last 6 to 9 months. And thank you again for the chair's support on that. Further, I think, the concept of negotiating a contribution agreement with the city and having a welcome party on the other side to make it relatively easy to not only address septic tank phase out, but also provide a 5-year stability for JEA should not be overlooked. And lastly, but probably most importantly, as a team, we have implemented some corporate controls and a fundamental belief in increasing transparency for the public, our city council, and the administration, as well as our customers. We have focused our organization on a results-based approach on driving value and profitability. So on that note, I would like to end by inviting Mr. Wanamaker back to the table when when a company is focused on value and profitability, the natural outcome is a company that makes the most efficient use of its assets while minimizing risk. To that end, the management team, upon reviewing our balance sheet, has produced a corporate efficiency and risk management plan, which I'm going to hand out that looks at the next 4 years. I'll let Mr. Wanamaker walk through the details and look forward to discussing this proposed plan with the board. It's my belief that this might be the final step of a transition that with all the aforementioned accomplishments, and those aren't an exhaustive list, now positions JEA to drive significant value for the city of Jacksonville, as well as be a leader in the industry for many years to come. Right.
Thank you. Can we bring up the presentation, the last one that they just handed out, please?
CEO report.
JEA is an $8 billion enterprise comprised of approximately 2,000 people that serve over 1 million people in 4 counties. We generate approximately $800 million per year in net free cash flow from operations. Since 2010, we have paid off over $2.5 billion in debt and invested nearly $2.4 billion in capital projects in our community, all from operating cash flow. Today, the board approved a proposal to extend our contribution agreement by an additional 2 years, providing planning certainty through 2023. This extension of our contribution agreement provides JEA a 5-year window of certainty on city contribution while demonstrating JEA's thought leadership in the city of Jacksonville relative to septic tank phase-out. Between Thursday of last week and yesterday, JEA obtained a commitment to increase the capacity in our revolving line of credit by $200 million at the same terms and price, which demonstrates the confidence of a key lender in our ability and our willingness to pay our obligations. As a result, JEA now has over $1.1 billion in cash on our balance sheet and $500 million of additional revolving credit liquidity, including the additional $200 million approved by the board today. Mr. Zahn indicated that JEA has pivoted to a company focused on growing value and profitability. As such, the next natural step in increasing value is optimizing utilization of our assets and reducing our debt. In front of the board is a plan to pay off $600 million in debt in 2019 and over $1 billion by 2022, while still investing $1.6 billion over the same time period in our system with no new debt and no base rate increases. Under this plan, operating free cash flow will increase by an average of $100 million per year, $400 million cumulative over the next 4 years. Furthermore, this plan will maintain strong financial metrics and of liquidity and coverage. This plan demonstrates JEA's financial strength, its commitment to value, and a focus on profitability. Last but not least, the plan demonstrates an entire management team dedicated to increasing operational efficiency and reducing corporate risk. So to walk through some of the highlights, $600 million in debt reduction in 2019 includes almost $478 million of debt acceleration in addition to regularly scheduled maturities. This plan includes the provision of $1.6 billion for capital investment with no new debt and no base rate increases. With this debt acceleration, JEA will achieve somewhat of a milestone. By 2020, we will have paid off over half of our debt since hitting our all-time high in 2010. In the context of the longer-term view of the electric system, by the end of 2022, JEA's electric debt will be the lowest it has been in nearly 40 years, since 1983. Since that time, the invested capital in the system has increased by over 400%. But again, it's not just debt reduction for the sake of debt reduction. This plan will further accelerate free cash flow and allow JEA to continue to cash fund capital investments and drive leverage ratios to quarter-century lows with no base rate increases. The details are to the top left chart on this page is our debt service schedule. The bars represent total debt service in each year. The blue bar and the black line show the new debt service under the proposed plan. All of the bars above the black line represent debt service that we are paying off early. This reduced debt service between now and 2026 substantially increases free cash flow in the electric system to the tune of $260 million over the next 4 years. The story on water is similar. By 2022, total long-term debt will reach its lowest point in 20 years. Also by 2022, the water system's leverage ratios will reach levels not seen since the dot-com bust, with no base rate increases. Water operating free cash flow will increase by $140 million over the next 4 years, which will all be reinvested in capital projects in the system. But what do those capital plans look like? They look like an average annual increase of $119 million in CapEx over the prior 5-year period. We're going to increase capital expenditures and investment in our community by 43% over the previous 5 years. So to summarize, JEA's financial strength, we have approved an increase to our revolver of $200 million at the same terms and pricing. We've negotiated a contribution agreement extension. We have put forth a plan to pay off over $1 billion in debt by 2022 and to cash fund $1.6 billion in CapEx, an increase of over 40% in the prior 5 years, all with solid AA financial credit metrics and no base rate increases. So to the members of the board, my colleagues, this community, and everyone watching, I would simply say that these actions demonstrate our credit, our ability, our willingness to pay, and that JEA is operating from a position of financial strength. Thank you.
Mr. Zahn? So, I'm not looking for a matter of action. The way I've always viewed my role over the last 6 months is to set the stage for the company to be highly successful for the next decade, not only from a business model, as I talked about in my first board meeting, but also contemplating efficient operations, both from a financial as well as from an operation. And the management team here has rallied for the last 6 months, as I continue to reiterate, around really driving the concept of value and profitability throughout the organization. I think this is the natural next step. I think when you start to look at concepts like RONA, return on net assets, and start to see that this plan would actually increase RONA to above debt, our cost of debt, is a pretty substantial change in the concept of moving from more of a government type run utility to more of a professionally and profitability driven utility. And I open it to the board's comments, and I certainly hope that you consider this as you look forward.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker. I will share with the board that when Mr. Zahn first presented this information to me, I was a bit overwhelmed. It's striking to me that we could improve our debt service coverage ratios, improve our free cash flow, continue to reinvest in the business, and achieve those kinds of increases in our RONA. And I commend Mr. Zahn, Mr. Wanamaker, Ms. Dykes, and the entire financial team for their deep dig on this and finding new ways to demonstrate not only their financial acumen, but the strength of this organization. So I would suggest this. I'll accept your comments, but I would suggest this. While not strictly required, this sort of accelerated debt retirement plan is a significant action for JEA. I would ask that this be placed on the agenda for action by the board at our next board meeting. I would ask that each of you take this information, review it carefully in detail, and then reach out to Mr. Zahn and Mr. Wanamaker before our November board meeting with any additional questions that you might have, so we can have an intelligent discussion about proceeding on the proposed plan. So that's my suggestion. Any initial comments, having just received this wealth of information? Mr. Campion?
No, I certainly agree, and this is a very, very good use of the generated cash from the company, and it sets the business on a very strong foundation for continued growth, and to be able to pay down debt at an accelerated rate certainly shows the commitment the management team has to their business plan, and because most businesses I've ever been involved in, nobody's ever tried to pay debt down fast. So
not many have this luxury. Ms.
Correct.
Johnson?
No, I think it's a bold plan. I certainly want to review it a little bit more, but not only putting in place an operational plan, but a financial plan is strong. Keep the business moving forward and really manage debt and CapEx.
Ms. Green?
Impressive, aggressive. But I also feel that I'm confident. I'm confident in our team that it's achievable, and I'll look forward to understanding how we make it possible.
Thank you. Revenue Bill? Ms. Flanagan?
I agree. Great work by the team. I know that they've put a lot of man hours into this, and I look forward to reviewing it again next month.
Thank you. Mr. Cumber?
I'll just echo everybody else.
Thank you. Well, I know I'm standing in the way between you and adjournment, so I'll keep my chair report brief, but I do want to address several key topics. One is Hurricane Michael. JEA has sent almost 150 team members to Tallahassee, Bay County, Calhoun County, and elsewhere to assist with restoring electric, water, and wastewater services to our fellow Floridians who were impacted by Hurricane Michael. We couldn't be more proud of these team members who are working to help those who were impacted by the storm. This is the essence of mutual aid. They were there for us, for Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, so we are there for them, and we're proud of our team members who are out there. I want to thank Mr. Zahn and the team for leading. Where's Gina? Back to the back. Leading the Innovation Summit. You guys did a great job. For those of you who were able to attend Friday a week ago, the Innovation Summit, co-sponsored by JTA and the Chamber of Commerce, brought together distinguished speakers from around the world, really, to speak to us about issues that we as a community will face and how to address those in a bold and innovative way. It was Mr. Zahn's brainchild. He brought it together in 6 months, and it was fantastic. So thank you for that. On the search committee, echo Mr. Cumber's remarks. Thank you to those members of the search committee who gave countless hours the last week interviewing candidates. I will say that this national search has attracted some of the most high-caliber candidates you can imagine, which just goes to prove what we already knew. JEA is a tremendously successful utility. We're located in a beautiful part of the country, dynamic and growing, and the position of CEO of JEA is one of prestige that is coveted by some of the most talented professionals in the utility industry. I'm very impressed with the candidates, including our own interim CEO, and I'm confident that the search committee and this board will hire the best CEO for JEA. And finally, I want to speak to the Moody's action from last week. Much has been said already, but I want to speak from the board perspective. The Moody's action is outrageous, unjustified, and irresponsible. There is absolutely no factual basis for the downgrade that Moody's took against JEA in the city of Jacksonville. There has been no change in the financial condition of JEA, which continues to be one of the strongest financially in the industry, as has been demonstrated by the proposed plan of accelerated debt repayment that we just discussed. At the end of August 2018, JEA had cash and investments of $1.4 billion. We have enough cash to run the electric and water wastewater system for 7 months and over a year, respectively, even if we didn't receive a single penny of revenues. That's strong. JEA has affirmed on numerous occasions, and we reaffirm today, that JEA will honor and fulfill all of its obligations under the bonds that Moody's has downgraded and all of our debt instruments. For Moody's to suggest otherwise is contrary to the actions and statements of this board and our management. Moody's attributed its action in part to a lawsuit that JEA recently filed with respect to its power purchase agreement with MEAG for energy from Plant Vogtle. Moody's characterized that lawsuit as an effort by JEA to avoid its financial obligations, but nothing could be farther from the truth. We have asked the court to determine what our legal obligations are with respect to the PPA in light of the Vogtle owner's decision to proceed with an uncapped construction contract following the Westinghouse bankruptcy. We continue to honor all of our obligations pending an outcome of that litigation, and will abide by the court's decision in that litigation. Finally, I would note that this action by Moody's has in no way adversely affected JEA or its customers. We're not paying higher interest rates on our bonds because of this action, and we're not being shunned by the credit markets. As the board learned today, JP Morgan, one of our trusted financial partners, offered us an additional $200 million in 3 business days at the same price and terms as we enjoyed prior to this downgrade. So the market that Moody's ostensibly serves, the banks that have actually put their money at risk, they have confirmed to JEA that they are willing to continue to lend to JEA despite Moody's actions. JEA has and always will seek to provide reliable and safe utilities at the lowest possible cost, and we will continue to work in the best interest of our customers and the communities we serve. This board and our leadership team believe the actions that have been and are being taken by JEA are in the best interest of JEA and our long-term financial position. With that, we're adjourned.